The courtroom was silent. Every eye was on the judge, but then, out of nowhere, a teenage boy stood up, his voice cutting through the tension like a knife. "You took my father away," he said, and in that moment, the entire room froze. What happens next will leave you speechless. This boy's fight for justice has only just begun, and the shocking truth will change everything. But what if the system they trust is the one that betrayed them all along? Stay tuned, because you won't. Believe the twist coming next, hit that play button and follow the journey to a truth that nobody expected. Teenage boy confronts judge and says, "You took my father away." The courtroom freezes. The courtroom was tense. The heavy silence filled every corner of the room. People sat still as if afraid to breathe. The gavel had just struck. A verdict had been delivered. But it was not the end of the story. A young boy, no older than 15, stood up from his seat. His legs were shaking, but his voice was steady. He looked directly at the judge who sat high on the bench, surrounded by authority. The boy's hands were clenched into fists at his sides. His heart pounded in his chest, each beat louder than the last. Everyone turned to look at him, sensing something was about to change. The boy stepped forward, his shoes tapping softly against the cold marble floor. His eyes never left the judge, not for a second. The room was so quiet that every step seemed amplified. The boy's breath came in sharp, shallow gasps. He stopped just a few feet away from the judge. The tension was unbearable. The judge, an older man with a stern expression, raised an eyebrow. He had heard countless statements in his time, but none like this. The boy's voice broke the silence. "You took my father away," he said. His words hung in the air, heavy with emotion. There was no shouting, no anger in his tone, just raw, unfiltered pain. A murmur ran through the room. People exchanged uncomfortable glances. The judge's eyes widened, slightly. He had expected many things, but not this. The boy's words pierced through the courtroom like a knife to the heart. A lump formed in the throat of every person who heard him. No one moved. No one dared to. The courtroom seemed to freeze in time. The boy continued, his voice barely above a whisper. "You sentenced him to prison, but you never saw what it did to me." He paused, his eyes locked onto the judge's. For a brief moment, the judge seemed to soften. Then, just as quickly, he straightened his posture. "You don't understand the law, son," the judge said, trying to regain control. But the boy wasn't finished. He took a step closer, his face now inches from the judge's. "You don't understand me," he whispered fiercely. The room was so still, it felt like the walls themselves were holding their breath. The boy's voice cracked as he spoke again. "You took my father away, and you didn't think about me." A cold chill ran down the judge's spine. For a brief second, he was just a man, standing face to face with a child who had lost everything. The boy's eyes were filled with pain, but also with something else, something dark, a deep, unsettling fury. His words hit the judge harder than any verdict ever could. The room was eerily silent now. The boy turned away slowly, his back to the judge. But before he could leave, he stopped. He paused for just a moment, taking one last look at the judge. "You'll never understand," he said. The boy walked out of the courtroom, his footsteps echoing down the hall. The door clicked shut behind him, but the weight of his words lingered in the air. The judge remained frozen in his seat, his face pale. The murmurs in the room slowly started again, but they were different now. There was no judgment, no verdict, only the silent understanding of what had just unfolded. A teenage boy had spoken truth, and in doing so, he had shaken the very foundations of the court. What happened next would change everything, and the boy's words, like an irreversible chain, would echo for years to come. His father might have been taken away, but his fight was far from over, and so was his story. the courtroom remained heavy with silence. The judge, still sitting in his chair, was no longer the figure of authority he once appeared to be. His hands trembled slightly as he looked down at the papers in front of him. The air was thick with an unspoken tension. Outside the courtroom, the boy walked briskly down the hallway. His footsteps were quick, urgent. But with every step, a feeling of dread crept into his chest. He knew the battle wasn't over. His father was locked away, but that wasn't the end of it. He was determined to make it right. He reached the exit of the courthouse, his hand gripping the door handle tightly. For a brief moment, he paused and looked back, as if expecting someone to stop him. But no one came. The weight of what he had just done felt immense. The confrontation in the courtroom had been only the first step in his plan. And now, more than ever, he knew the fight ahead would be harder than anything he had ever imagined. The boy stepped out into the street, the cold wind hitting his face. It was a sharp contrast to the warmth of the courtroom, but it felt right. He pulled, his jacket tighter around himself, his mind racing. His father had always told him that life wasn't fair, that people didn't always get what they deserved. The boy had learned that lesson all too well, but now he had to make sure that something changed. He couldn't let his father's life be defined by a mistake. He couldn't let his own life be defined by it either. With each passing second, his resolve grew stronger. He knew the world wouldn't give him the justice he wanted, but maybe, just maybe, he could force them to listen. He pulled his phone from his pocket and dialed a number. The phone rang for a few moments before someone picked up. "Hello?" a voice said on the other end. The boy's voice was calm but filled with determination. "I need your help," he said. "It's time to make this right." He could hear the hesitation on the other side of the line. But it didn't matter. The boy wasn't asking for permission anymore. He was taking control. The journey had just begun, and there would be no turning back. The voice on the other end of the line hesitated for a moment. But then the words came. "All right," the voice said, a sense of reluctant understanding settling in. The boy's grip on the phone tightened, his fingers pressing into the plastic as if trying to draw strength from it. "I'll do what I can," the voice continued. "But you need to know this won't be easy. There are forces here that they don't like people rocking the boat." The boy closed his eyes, the weight of the truth sinking in. He knew it wouldn't be easy, but there was no other choice. "Just get it done," the boy replied. His voice was steady, but there was a fierceness in it now, a fire that hadn't been there before. "I will," the voice answered, and then there was a click as the line went dead. The boy stood there, frozen in the chill of the evening air. The fight had just taken on a different tone. He had a plan now, but it was dangerous, and it wasn't just his father's future on the line. It was his too. The courthouse seemed like a distant memory now, a place that had rejected him, his anger, his plea. But he had no intention of letting it stay that way. He looked around the street, the dim street lights, flickering, casting shadows that seemed to stretch for miles. It felt like the whole city was holding its breath, waiting. For what? He didn't know. But he was determined to find out. He shoved his phone back into his pocket and started walking, each step, carrying him further into the unknown. His mind was racing, but there was a clarity in it now, a sharp focus that hadn't been there before. Every corner, every alley he passed seemed to whisper of what was to come. A new chapter was beginning, and the boy was ready to write it himself. His father had been taken away, but the boy would not let his legacy be forgotten. The justice that had been denied to his family would not go unchallenged. The courtroom, the judge, the system. It would all have to answer. He would make sure of it. There was no going back now. The boy's footsteps echoed through the empty streets, a steady rhythm that matched the pounding of his heart. His breath, visible in the cold night air, came in short bursts, but his mind was clear. Each step took him closer to something bigger, something dangerous. But it didn't matter. He was willing to do whatever it took. He turned a corner, his eyes scanning the shadows around him. He couldn't shake the feeling that someone was watching. But when he looked, the street was empty. His instincts told him to keep moving forward, to not stop, not now. He had made a decision, and there was no turning back. After a few minutes, he reached a small, run-down building tucked away in a narrow alley. It was an unremarkable place, hidden from the main streets, but the boy knew it was exactly where he needed to be. The door creaked as he pushed it open, the sound sharp in the quiet night. Inside, the air was stale, the smell of dust and old wood hanging heavily in the room. A single light bulb hung from the ceiling, casting an eerie glow on the faces of those already waiting. A man stood in the corner, tall and lean, his expression unreadable. The boy nodded at him, and the man gestured for him to come closer. "You're early," the man said, his voice low. "I have to be," the boy replied, his voice steady but laced with tension. "It's time." The man studied him for a moment, then motioned toward a chair. "Sit. We need to talk strategy." The boy hesitated, then moved to sit across from him. "What's the plan?" the boy asked, his voice firm. The man leaned in slightly, his gaze unwavering. "We make a move tomorrow. We expose the judge, the entire system that put your father away." The boy's eyes narrowed. "How?" The man smiled, though it was cold, almost predatory. "We have connections. We'll gather evidence, the kind that they can't ignore. They won't be able to sweep it under the rug this time." The boy clenched, his fists. "And what about the judge?" "Leave him to us," the man replied. "The truth will be enough." The boy felt a surge of relief, but it was short-lived. There was still a lingering doubt, a question he couldn't ignore. What if it's not enough? What if they come after us? The man's smile faded. "Then we fight back." The boy nodded, but the weight of the situation pressed on him, the fear of what could happen next creeping into his thoughts. He had already come this far. There was no turning back now. He had made a promise to his father, and he wasn't going to let it slip through. His fingers, his father's life, his family's future, it was all on the line. Tomorrow would be the beginning of something bigger than he could have imagined, and whatever the cost, he was ready to pay it. He stood up, his mind resolute. "Let's do it." The man stood as well, and, for the first time, there was a flicker of respect in his eyes. "Then we move fast. We don't wait for anyone's permission." The boy nodded, knowing that once the plan was set in motion, nothing would be the same. Not for him, not for the judge, not for anyone involved. The boy walked out of the building, his steps steady and unwavering. Tomorrow was the day everything changed. The boy stepped out into the cold night air once again, his mind a whirl of thoughts. The plan was in motion, but uncertainty still gnawed at him. Would it work? Would the evidence be enough to take down someone like the judge? His breath came out, in sharp bursts. But his steps were steady. He had no choice but to trust the man in the building, to trust that the evidence they'd gathered was solid enough to expose the truth. Tomorrow would be the beginning. He had to believe that. His phone buzzed in his pocket, breaking the silence of the night. He pulled it out quickly, his heart skipping. A beat. It was a message. The screen lit up with a simple text. "We have what we need. Meet at 8 a.m. Don't be late." The boy felt his pulse quicken. This was it. The moment he had been waiting for. The moment he would face the judge, face the system that had wronged his father, and finally take control of his destiny. But as he looked at the message, another thought crossed his mind. What if the judge had already anticipated this? What if he was already prepared? What if the whole system, the one the boy had grown to distrust, was already steps ahead of him? The doubt crept in, but he pushed it aside. He couldn't afford to doubt now. He had come too far to back down. He glanced around the empty street, every shadow seeming darker than before, as though the world itself was holding its breath. The weight of the task ahead felt heavier with each passing second. He needed to rest, but sleep felt like a distant luxury. The only thing on his mind now was tomorrow. The boy turned his back to the street and walked toward his home, each step slow, deliberate, as though he were preparing himself for what lay ahead. The door creaked open and he stepped inside, the warmth of his house a stark contrast to the chill of the night. He walked into his room and locked the door behind him. Sitting on the edge of his bed, he stared at the ceiling, his mind racing. Tomorrow, he would confront the system. Tomorrow, he would expose the judge. Tomorrow, everything would change. But for now, all he could do was wait. The night passed in a blur, and when the first light of dawn filtered through the curtains, the boy knew it was time. He stood, stretched, and dressed in silence, every movement mechanical, his mind focused entirely on the task ahead. As he walked out of his house and into the early morning air, he felt a finality settle in his chest. There was no turning back. He had made his decision, and now he would see it through. He had to make sure his father's story was heard. He had to make sure justice was done. He could already hear the whispers of what was to come. And as he walked down the street toward the meeting spot, the weight of it all felt like it was finally sinking in. Tomorrow, the judge's world would begin to unravel, and the boy would be the one to make it happen. The boy's footsteps were steady, but the weight of the day's task pressed against him like a wall. The morning light was still dim, casting long shadows as he made his way toward the meeting spot. His phone buzzed again, a sharp reminder that there was no turning back now. He pulled it out and saw a new message. "We're in position. Be careful." The boy's heart thudded a little faster. He wasn't the only one involved now. This had become bigger than him, bigger than his father. This was about exposing a system that had crushed too many lives. He reached the alley where a car waited, its engine humming quietly, parked beneath a flickering street lamp. The man from the night before was already inside, leaning against the back seat. His expression was unreadable as he saw the boy approach. "You ready?" the man asked, his voice low and serious. The boy nodded once, firmly. "Let's go," he said, his words steady despite the storm of emotions inside him. The door to the car clicked open, and the boy slid inside. The driver didn't speak, just pulled away from the curb, the car blending into the morning traffic. They drove in silence, the tension between them palpable. The boy's mind raced. What if they were caught? What if this was all for nothing? The doubt was there, gnawing at him, but he refused to let it take hold. He couldn't afford fear. He couldn't afford to be weak. As the car turned a corner, the boy's eyes caught sight of the courthouse looming ahead. The same place where his father had been sentenced. The same place that had denied him the justice he deserved. The boy's breath caught in his throat, but he quickly exhaled, forcing himself to focus. "We're almost there," the man said quietly, his eyes darting. To the rearview mirror. "Get ready." The boy's hands clenched into fists, his nails digging into his palms. He felt the car slow, then stop, just around the corner from the courthouse. The tension inside the vehicle thickened. "Stay close," the man instructed, his voice a low whisper. "We go in, get the evidence, and get out. No hesitation." The boy nodded, his jaw set. Without another word, they stepped out of the car. The boy followed the man down a narrow alleyway, the sound of their footsteps echoing off the brick walls. As they neared a side entrance to the courthouse, the boy's heart pounded so loudly he was sure it could be heard from a mile away. The man reached for the door handle, but just before he opened it, he paused. He glanced at the boy. "Are you sure about this?" The boy's voice was a quiet whisper, but it held an undeniable certainty. "I have to be." The man nodded, then pushed the door open slowly. The air inside the courthouse was cold, and the faint hum of lights overhead was the only sound. The place felt empty, abandoned almost. They moved swiftly, taking a staircase that led down to a basement area. This was where they were headed, the records room. The place where the evidence that could destroy the judge's reputation was hidden. They reached the door. The boy's pulse quickened. It was locked. The man took out a small, sleek tool and began working on the lock. Each second felt like an eternity. Finally, with a quiet click, the door opened. Inside, rows of filing cabinets lined the walls, their contents shrouded in mystery. The boy's eyes scanned the room, but the man knew exactly where to go. They moved quickly, searching through the files until they found what they were looking for. The boy's hands trembled as the man pulled out a thick folder, its contents enough to send shivers down his spine. "Here it is," the man said, his voice low. "This is what we need." The boy reached out, his fingers brushing the folder, and for the first time, he felt like they were finally doing something that mattered. He could feel it. Justice was within their grasp. But just as he was about to take the folder, a sound shattered the silence. Footsteps, heavy footsteps coming down the hallway. The boy's heart skipped a beat. They weren't alone. The door to the basement creaked open, and the man quickly shoved the folder into the boy's hands. "Go!" he hissed. Without thinking, the boy turned and bolted toward the back door, his breath quick and shallow. He could hear the man shouting behind him. But the pounding of his own heart drowned out everything else. The footsteps grew louder, closer. The boy pushed open the door and raced into the alley. But as he did, he turned just in time to see the man standing in the doorway, facing the oncoming. "Threat! Run!" the man yelled. The boy didn't hesitate. He sprinted down the alley, clutching the folder tightly to his chest, but deep down, he knew this was far from over. And the closer he got to the end of this mission, the more the stakes were rising. The boy's legs burned as he ran, his breath coming in ragged bursts. He didn't dare look back. The folder clutched tightly in his hands felt like the only thing that mattered, the weight of it pulling him forward with a sense of urgency. He turned a corner and slowed, ducking into a narrow side street. He couldn't risk being seen. His mind raced. What had happened to the man who helped him? Had he made it out? Was he safe? But there was no time to worry about that now. His heart was racing, and as he glanced around, he knew they couldn't be far behind. The streets were still quiet, the world around him asleep, but he was wide awake, aware of every noise, every shadow. He kept running, pushing through the pain in his muscles, his focus solely on getting away with the evidence. Minutes felt like hours, but eventually he reached the safety of the small apartment where they had planned to meet. He rushed inside, barely taking a breath as he closed the door behind him. The apartment was empty. He was alone, for now. The boy dropped the folder onto the small table, his hands trembling as he opened it, revealing the damning documents inside. Each page was filled with proof of corruption, lies, and cover-ups. The judge had used his power for years to destroy families. And now, the truth was in his hands. The boy took a deep breath, letting it out slowly. He couldn't help but feel a wave of relief wash over him. It wasn't over yet, but the hardest part was done. He didn't know what would happen next. Would the authorities take the evidence seriously? Would the judge face consequences for his actions? And what about the man who had helped him? He still didn't know what had happened to him, but he hoped he was safe. The boy sat down on the edge of the couch, staring at the folder. His father's voice echoed in his mind. "Life isn't fair, but you can't let it break you." The boy had fought back. He had done what his father never could, and now he had a chance to change everything. He looked at the folder again, a new sense of purpose building inside him. Tomorrow, he would hand the evidence over to the right people. He would make sure the truth came out. And no matter what happened, he knew one thing for sure. He had taken back control. The courtroom had tried to silence him, but it was his voice that would be heard now. The boy stood up, feeling a sense of finality settle in his chest. He wasn't the same person who had walked into that courthouse days ago. He was stronger, and as he walked toward the door, he knew that no matter what the future held, he had already won. In the end, justice wasn't about the system. It was about the courage to stand up and fight for what's right, and the boy had done that, no matter the cost.